So thanks very much for joining us for this session. We've got Peter Smith from Sapphire Irrigation. He's going to be talking about maximising the yield gap, a part of the Smarter Irrigation for Profit project. So thanks very much, Peter.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate the time to be able to do it. This is part of a larger project that takes in various commodities, and dairy is one of them. And there are 10 optimisation sites around the country. And this is for the Tocal site that I just want to quickly talk about. Maybe I'm waiting for it to, here we go. At the Tocal site, we've used 3 tools to help with irrigation scheduling, irrigation management. The key irrigation management action is irrigation scheduling. So I'm not going into all the details, but I just want to highlight these tools and what we've achieved. First one is pasture. It's a free tool being developed especially for the Australian dairy systems. So I encourage people to use it. And if you like, it's a tool to show you what's going in and out of the water bank account. Just like you might check your cash flow, what's going in and out. This is giving you a picture of what's going in and out. The diagram on the right shows the season that we're in. We started with pasture sown on the 1st of April, or emerging on the 1st of April last year, and it's almost up to where we are now. The green line is the water balance. The blue lines at the bottom are the rainfall recordings, and the maroon lines at the bottom are the irrigation inputs. The yellow line running across the top is the full point of the soil, and the red line running across the graph down lower is the refill point, which is where we're saying you should refill the soil profile. And you can see that the inputs are the rain and the irrigation. Every time we get those, the green line jumps up, and when it goes down, it's the plant using the water, which is calculated from weather data for your particular site. And you can see that this season, the whole breadth of the season, that we had a pretty reasonably wet autumn winter time, and we had a very wet late spring and summer, like everyone's experienced. And you can see the ups and downs reflected in that graph. Where the peaks occur above the yellow line, that's excess water. And if you're irrigating, you don't want to have excess water. When you've got big rain, you can't do much about it. When it goes below the red line, that's showing the crop is probably in stress and you're losing production. Just want to highlight a couple of spots where at Tocal some decisions were made. The first one is the red circle I've got there, where I've got a late start. The winter time, you can see the rain there was plenty of it, and it was just declining as the winter went on. Forecast might have been for some more rain, but it wasn't quite coming in the quantity it needed. Therefore, the irrigation started here in just at the end of July and beginning of August. And that's a bit of a late start. The crop has gone into stress, or the pasture's gone into stress, and that's a critical one that's been identified in the project that might lead to the green drought. And the reason is because things look pretty good. The crop doesn't show stress in these cooler months, but 2 things are happening. The weather's about to warm, and if it's ryegrass as this was, it's into its getting into its really fast growth stage, so it's going to use a lot of water. That's ramping up the water requirement dramatically. If you get it late, you can often find yourself stranded down here, even though you might be irrigating regularly. Now, the saviour of this system is that it's got good, what we call system capacity, the ability to add water to the profile. So Matthew Brett, the manager, was able to get that out of what could have been some trouble. But I want to emphasise that because much better at this time of year to go early so that you don't get the late start and set yourself back. The cost of lost pasture production in that time period, especially if you haven't got good system capacity and it sustains through the rest of the season, is huge. The most important irrigation you can have is this one here, the starting one. And if you miss it, you could say the most expensive irrigation is the one you didn't put on. So I just want to highlight that at this season that we've been in, I think we started a little bit late. Got two more circled here in orange where it's gone below the refill point. And these ones are part of the decision-making process, and they were delayed for the rain. There's weather forecasts that were saying rain should come, didn't quite come at the right time. The manager's balancing between if he goes early, will he cause waterlogging and lose production again? Where you've got these peaks up here with the heavy rains, for example, that's actually shutting down the pasture and you're losing production. I think that was mentioned earlier on with waterlogging and the like with the other guys. So you want to avoid that if you can. And it's a trade-off of risking, is there going to be too much stress where we'll lose production? So this is a management decision based on the outlooks. And you could argue at this point, maybe should have gone earlier. Here's the irrigation event that, that was applied. The rain did come and it went quite high. If it had been just a few days earlier, wouldn't have had to irrigate. Similar with this one. Took a longer time for the rain to come. It didn't come in the quantities that might have been forecast, and it sort of kept it hovering around the refill point. So those ones are not as bad as this early one because they are risk-based decisions made in the mature phase of the crop in the midst of the season, looking at the various factors that are coming. This one, we should have got away earlier. And you can pick that up from the water balance from this thing, as you can see. It doesn't give you predictions, but it does show you where the trend might be heading. This tool is another one we used at Tocal. It's another free one, which I encourage all dairy farmers to be on, supplied by Swan Systems, which is a commercial supplier of scheduling systems. But this information they provide free for your specific site. You go onto their website and set yourself up. And it gives you a forecast. That's the sort of, this is what comes in the email. You get a forecast of the ETO, which is the crop evapotranspiration or pasture evapotranspiration. Gives you a forecast of the rain potential and the likely estimate, and also of the wind speed and the temperature. That's the sort of stuff that Matt Brett was looking at when he's considering whether to irrigate or not. How likely is the rain coming? And this one, there are a number of sources of this sort of information. This one appears to be pretty reliable, reasonably accurate. Given that it's free, it's a really good one to get onto, and it's helped Matt in his decision making quite a bit, and some of the others in our reference group. Third tool that's been used at Tocal is soil moisture probes. Under each of the three pivots, there's at least one soil moisture probe located down to a depth of 40 centimetres. And the water balance line is, if you like, the water going in and out, cash flow. This one is showing is actually what's in the bank account. The negative is it's only one spot in the whole paddock, and there could be variation in the paddock. There usually is some variation in the paddock. So it's a really good check of actually what's going on there. And this is not lining up with the things I was just showing you, because unfortunately the probes at Tocal are not working properly. And that's due to, not due to Matt's issues, that's due to procurement issues through a government department, trying to get it sorted out. But it's showing you some issues here. Now, if there were peaks in the, so the rainfall, the soil is saying, I can only take so much. It's just like you sticking the bowser in your petrol tank and your tank fills up and you keep the bowser going, it spills all over the fuel station floor. When you're done and you put the lid on, you've got no more fuel in the tank than if you'd stopped it at full point. Same here. If you keep putting water on, it's not there available for you. It runs off or it runs through and can create waterlogging, as this indicates. So it's a really good tool to see what's happening in the bank account, the water bank account. Don't worry about the figures on the left. They are ridiculous. They're not meaningful in the sense of being accurate, but they do show you the trend in this instance. Most probes will show you something more useful or more meaningful than that. Just to show a comparison of the irripasture with the soil probe, again, not the season we've had because we didn't have probe data available, but this is showing, I've had to expand the irripasture graph so it looks a bit weird, but here we have a water balance showing rainfall. You can see the rain, there was an irrigation event and rain. It irrigation event pushed it back into the RAW zone. The rain well and truly pushed it above, and then shows the crop using water well. It's just a water balance. It says that much went in, and now some's coming out with the crop using it well. If we look at the soil probe, we see, yes, the irrigation and rainfall put water in, but it was waterlogged. It was overfull, and it took a while to drain, and the rain kept coming a little bit, kept it filled up there and kept it waterlogged. The pasture did not then kick in and do what it should have done. It took a few days. Here's this curve as it starts to come down here, is showing the pasture using water. By having one piece of information, we might have thought, yeah, things are going well. The soil probe said, no, hang on, we've overfilled the profile of the tank, and we've shut the pasture production down for a bit. Same deal over here. Even a bigger set of rain events caused a higher peak, a more prolonged overwatering, and even the area pasture shows that, but it shows the crop water balance kicking in, and it's just based on the weather data that's at the site. But our soil probe is showing a much longer and extended period of waterlogging and of pasture growth not occurring and water use not occurring. So just to show how they might complement and how you can use both, and that's why the season that I was just showing you, Matthew Brett might have delayed putting some water on straight when the area pasture showed, because he'd be aware that there would be some waterlogging occurring in the paddocks. Didn't have the probes to tell him, but this information from these probes from previous seasons was alerting him to that.
Pete, can I just jump in there? That's really quite useful information in terms of nitrogen loss and just, yeah. So I think there's other benefits of the soil probes than just having, just irrigation. There's this understanding of setback of pasture and nitrogen loss that you can respond to afterwards. Yep. And that'll occur, particularly in an East Coast low, just knowing how long and how severe that waterlogging event was is quite useful.
Yep.
And Neil, even from a planning point of view, so I think that's what we're going to get better at is if we are going to go and add some fertiliser, if you got something like this, we can sort of see where your moisture is up to, and then look at the forecast and give you a bit better understanding. Because if we are going to get that East Coast low, or there's prediction of rain, if you're dry, it's not so bad. But if we're already wet, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get waterlogging and or runoff, etc., etc. So I reckon that's really handy.
Yep. And in terms of just water efficiency, knowing what that's doing will save you perhaps irrigating needlessly and wasting water, as it's becoming more expensive and less available too. The integrated management here, this is good information, I think, to really complement all the stuff you have been talking about in terms of the pasture and fertiliser use. I've only got one more slide, and that's this one, to just summarise what we've done in the project over 3 seasons. Our first season was we had figures from January, February in 2020. Now, I just want to highlight some caution, because the time frames that we've got are not identical, and some of the quality of some of the data is varying. So in season 1, when we're just getting ourselves sorted out with measurements, we had figures for the pasture yields in January, February, which means the sort of ryegrass had gone off and there's a bit of a transition to kayak and other species. In season 2, we did manage to get some figures in the spring part of that same year. Some of the figures there were a little bit questionable too, so we had to make some assumptions in the pasture figures. The season that's just gone, we did quite a few readings through the spring period, and they were the pasture figures were pretty well done there, so they're pretty reliable. And we've got the water and power readings. And so just to say, have we improved under the centre pivots at Tocal, which are pretty good, I've got to say. And we can see that there is a significant change as we've gone through the 3 seasons. noting that these figures in the first 2 seasons might not be as accurate as they could be, but we've got very good performance up here in the season that's just gone. This item here, GPWUI, fancy term, gross production water use index, is just saying what's your yield based on the water that you've had, your irrigation and your rainfall. And we can see that's really an indicator of how well you're managing the water available to you. And it has increased as we've gone along up to this 1.61 that I think is a bit exceptional. If you've got poor figures like this, you want to say, well, what am I doing wrong? We've been able to put the cost of water onto that, the cost per tonne of dry matter. And of course, that varies depending on how much irrigation you had to use. Season 1 and season 3, we only had to put about 20% of irrigation, of the water applied was irrigation. Season 2, nearly half of it. So naturally, there's going to be a higher cost of water for that season. The energy use, we could also check too. That's giving you a little cross check on how efficiently pumps and things are working. And so it is the tonne produced for the energy applied. Similar with the cost of pumping. And one of the things, the cost does relate to this. It also relates to the energy charges. And Tocal managed to negotiate significantly lower electricity charges for these 2 seasons. So the cost there is not so much about efficiency as about the charging. This last figure is a little bit obscure, kilowatt hours per megalitre per metre head. And the reason you want to use that, all these ones here are good for checking between seasons of the one system, the one field or paddock that you're using. This one here allows you to check between fields or even between farms. So it gives a benchmark indicator that can be compared with your neighbour or with others. Now, the point that I want to highlight is to say, with the refinements using the tools through last spring, which was wet but not overly wet, we seem to have got a pretty good performance out of the irrigation. The irrigation was already pretty good with the centre pivots being relatively new and fairly diligent application being given to the management of it. But our figures would show that we've been able to improve that. I suspect it slightly overstates the picture, but the value of managing your irrigation water well, I think is reflected here. These are the metrics we put in the project for each 3 year, and all of the sites around the country, all 10 of them, are measuring these same metrics. And we want to encourage farmers to maybe have a go at that, measuring a lot of things in the pasture production that we've been through earlier today with fertilisers and growth rates and mixes and a whole lot of things. Well, irrigation is another very important component, and by taking a few other measurements, you can see how you're performing with it. And it really just requires yield, water use from your irrigation, rainfall that you've received, the energy figures that it's taken to apply the pumping, and then you can work out these figures and benchmark yourself against that too to see how you're going. That's about all I want to say in terms of info, mate. Happy for questions or comments.
It's really good, Peter. Any comments or questions for Peter?
Look, I mean, just absolutely terrific data and incredibly farm useful. I mean, and I might, what are we looking at for a farmer to install, you know, this system on farm as far as capital cost is concerned? Like, it's ultimately, it's great information, and that's going to be one of our realistic barriers. So what are we looking at to set one of those systems up for a farm in commercial practice?
Oh, given that if we assume the guy's already got his irrigation system in, that's the biggest expense.
Absolutely.
By a long way. Yeah, putting in soil probes is in the order of a couple of grand per site. It varies depending on the probes and who you get them from. The other 2 things we just mentioned, the Irri pasture and the Swan email, of course, they're both free. So the soil probes are relatively cheap. For mine, they're a good tool to help you manage an expensive system you've got in. You guys are normally forking out a lot of money, especially for a centre pivot. and yet they're talking hundreds of thousands. And for just a few under 10 grand, you can put a couple of sites in, and that'll help you to drive the thing much, much better.
Yeah.
Terrific. And given the cost and likely future cost of water, sort of really, it's not going to take a long time for most people to utilise this technology in a more efficient way to really pay that capex off quickly.
The other measurements that I've mentioned there, the kilowatt hours, normally you've got those already from your power meter, assuming you can distinguish your irrigation pump from any other power sources. And you're obliged, or soon be obliged, to have a water meter on, which is supposed to be properly installed. That can give you your flow or your irrigation applications.
There are some annual maintenance costs too, Neil, and also maintenance needed. We've had systems operating at Gloucester and just done a video on, we've had to redo the rain gauge, and and there's been some hiccups along the way, just keeping the system operating, but it's certainly useful. And
in terms of the weather data for the irrig pasture, it will extract the data from the Bureau of Meteorology weather stations, or the nearest ones. With Tocal, of course, it's on site, so that's brilliant. Sometimes if they're too far away, the weather conditions might be different to your farm. You learn to calibrate yourself a bit against that, but you don't have to have another weather station on site.
Fantastic, Peter. Thank you.
Good, Peter. Thanks very much. Some really cool tools there to help people make more informed decisions. So, for me, I used to run around as a full-time job checking neutron probes. So it's nice to see some of this stuff without the labour-intensive, dangerous technology that you used to have to use. So, fantastic stuff. And, I know from my experience with water scheduling, the importance, from a cropping point of view, it would have on our production. Trying to keep it between that refill and field capacity is so important. And I think with current conditions and, more likelihood of heavier rain events and drier conditions, etc., from the other ends, does make that scheduling, I think, a bit more difficult. So being able to use weather and know your soil type and how much moisture is there to make more informed decisions to stay in those ranges, because irrigating at the wrong time could be just as bad as not irrigating at all. So it works both ways.
Yep.
Fantastic stuff. And thank you very, very much for your time, Peter.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys.
That ends that session. So thanks very much, everybody, for attending, and look to see you next time.
Thanks, Josh.